All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Are You Smarter Than a Libertarian? I'm Jeff, and today we're diving into the emotional, philosophical, and economic origin story of Karl Marx. This is not Das Kapital Marx, not bearded revolutionary icon Marx. We're talking about 26-year-old, freshly exiled from Germany, Parisian cafe Marx. The Marx who was still part philosopher, part romantic humanist, and only beginning to morph into the economist who would eventually declare war on private property. And ultimately, it's a war that he needs to lose today. Today, we break down the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts of 1844, also called the Paris Manuscripts. They were unpublished in his lifetime, fragmentary, unfinished, and first printed in full in Germany in 1932. Every quotation reference here comes from the standard English translation by Martin Milligan, revised by Dirk K. Strick, Progress Publishers, 1959 edition, the height of communism. This is the birthplace of alienation theory. This is where Marx first sketches communism as the positive transcendence of private property. This is the bridge between philosopher Marx and economist Marx, and the bridge was built very crappily. And we're going to go deep into this, so hope you have some coffee. This is going to be good. Historical context: the 26-year-old revolutionary. In 1844, Marx is in Paris. He had just broken with the young Hegelians. He's absorbing three intellectual traditions at once. I know, he's pretty sealed up. German idealism, especially Hegel and Feuerbach. French utopian socialism, which utopian and socialism going together is like military and intelligence, doesn't work. Classic English political economy, particularly Adam Smith and David Ricardo. Now, you might be like, why is he talking about Adam Smith? I'll get to that. In the preface, Marx explains he originally planned to critique Hegel's philosophy of law in one unified work, but he realized that mixing abstract philosophical critiques with concrete social critiques was utterly unsustainable, kind of like communism and socialism. So instead, he chose to publish separate analysis and later unify them. I'm going to throw these pieces all over the place and then pull them all together at a later date. He insists his conclusions are based on a wholly empirical analysis based on conscientious critical study of political economy. That is just word salad that means nothing. This was in the preface. That is important. He is claiming to ground his critique in economic reality, not just speculative philosophy. He credits Feuerbach, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, humanistic turn as real theoretical revolution. Feuerbach had rejected Hegel's abstract idealism and brought philosophy back to real, sensuous human beings. This manuscript is Marx trying to fuse economics with humanism. And this fusion produces his most famous early concepts. Alienation. Now you might be wondering, what does all this mean? We're going to get to that, but if you're liking this so far, please like, comment, subscribe, and share, and let people know what is really going on. The first manuscript, The Economics Before the Explosion. Before Marx gets philosophical, he plays by the rules of classical economics, mainly Adam Smith. He summarizes Adam Smith on wages, profit, and of course, rent, which a lot of people don't like to pay, but that is what it is. The wages of labor. Wages are determined by struggle. Workers compete for survival. Capitalists compete for profit. In times of growth, wages may rise temporarily, but workers remain dependent. You're going to see where this is going. It's going to get really interesting. Marx pushes Smith's logic to its brutal conclusion. The workers becomes the most wretched of commodities, and that's in the first manuscript in the opening. That's where I'm getting this from. Now, let that sink in. A commodity. Commodities have value. If labor is bought and sold like wheat or iron, then the worker's value falls as supply increases. As capital accumulates, small capitalists are crushed. Competition intensifies, and workers are squeezed. Now you may be like, that sounds so bad. The worker survives at subsistence level. Does this sound familiar to anyone? This sounds really familiar to me, and we're going to debunk this really quick. Profit of capital. This is another part of it that we're going to get into a little deeper. Capital is accumulated labor. Profit is deducted from the product of labor. Now, that might not make sense to you, but it does if you actually understand a little bit of economics. The capitalist does not seek consumption, he seeks accumulation. Endless accumulation. This is starting to sound a lot like I'm jealous of what someone else has. Marx sees in Smith the seeds of something darker. The rule of capital over labor. Well, here's the thing, labor cannot exist without capital. Capital concentrations. Small proprietors disappear, wealth centralizes. The rent of land. This is all his critiques. This is all what he's talking about. Rent comes from difference in soil fertility, but in reality, it is shaped by power and competition. He is rallying against the very things that make humans excel. Marx already senses something historical happening. Landed property is becoming indistinguishable from capital, but it is capital. Feudal landowners are morphing into capitalists. Not really. These sections are not yet surplus value theory, which we have debunked multiple times on this channel. They are groundwork. Marx is accepting political economy's premise, then preparing to detonate them. And then here comes the explosion, even though it's more of a little bottle rocket. Estranged labor, the heart of the manuscripts. Marx transitions abruptly, like slamming on the brakes, and then he's getting rear ended with reality. We have proceeded from the premise of political economy on the basis of political economy itself. We have shown that the workers sink to the level of a commodity. Now, we have to grasp the intrinsic connection between private property and this whole estrangement. That quote comes from The Estrangement of Labor. And then here is the famous, famous line. The workers The worker becomes all the poorer the more wealth he produces. The devaluation of the world of men is in direct proportion to the increasing value of the world of things. This is the material dialectic he's starting to get into. This is the core claim. The more productive capitalism becomes, the more devalued the human becomes, which is not true. It's only a perception. Marx structures alienation in 4 layers, and we're going to get into these layers. And it's going to be kind of neat, but if you're liking this content, please like, comment, subscribe, share, and let me know what you think in the comments. Alienation from the product is the first. The object the worker creates confronts him as alien. It belongs to someone else. The more he produces, the more powerful the alien world of objects becomes. That's just basic envy and basic not understanding basic economics. Objectification becomes lost. The worker builds palaces. He lives in hovels. Here is the logical tension. Under voluntary exchange, libertarians argue, both parties benefits. Marx argues that benefit does not equal ownership of meaning. Production becomes separate. Alienation in the act of production. A lot of this what he's talking about just does not make logical sense. Labor is external to the worker. And we're going to quote Marx here in his own words. It does not belong to his intrinsic nature. He does not affirm himself, but denies himself. Does not develop freely his physical and mental energy, but mortifies his body and ruins his mind. That is not even real. Like, I'm gonna keep it real. It's not real. Work becomes forced. Not necessarily by whip, but by economic necessity. No, it doesn't. You have different means you can survive. The worker feels at home only when not working. This is a powerful psychological critique. Marx is not arguing merely about wages, he is arguing about dignity. Now, we can get into the dignity discussion at a later point, which I might do a video on. Alienation from species being. Humans are species beings because they consciously shape their life activities. You have control of your life, so you don't have to work if you don't want to. Animals produce only under immediate need. Humans produce freely and creatively. This is starting to contradict him a little bit. And this is in his own work. But under alienation, life activity becomes merely survival. No, it does not. You can go off grid and be completely fine by yourself. Eating, drinking, procreating becomes the only free act. No, those also cost money. The human becomes animal. The creative becomes mechanical. No, it doesn't. Now this is where we're going to push back logically. Marx assumes that wage labor necessitarily strips creativity. But history shows entrepreneurs, engineers, coders, inventors, artists flourish within markets. Look at the patronage system of Renaissance Italy. Is alienation inherent to markets, or is it contingent on conditions? That is the key libertarian challenge. Alienation from other men. If your labor belongs to someone else, then your relationship to others becomes distorted and disfigured. The capitalist appears as an alien power. No, he doesn't. He gives you the ability to have a wage, to have a living with his own money or other people's money. Marx writes, if the product of labor does not belong to the worker, then it can only belong to a man other than the worker. Well, no shit, Sherlock. You're using my machinery, my resources to produce something for me, and I'm giving you wages in exchange for it. Social relationships become mediated by ownership. Mediated by ownership. And here is the rhetorical crescendo. It produces palaces, but for the workers, hovels, beauty but deformity, intelligence but stupidity. It is poetic, it is sharp, and it is emotionally devastating. But is it universally true? Because we're going to deal with universal truths. Capitalism has also produced mass literacy, mass comfort, and mass upward mobility. Everyone who's complaining today would not have survived at the turn of the 20th century. So the question becomes, does production under private property necessarily dehumanize, or does it often empower? I would say it often empowers. Now we're getting into the second manuscript, Capital versus Labor. The great fight continues. The second manuscript is brief. You can feel free to look all these manuscripts up so you see I'm not just pulling this stuff making this stuff out of thin air. Marx called the workers a living capital, an indignant capital. Political economy recognized workers only when productivity. The unemployed worker becomes invisible. That is not necessarily true. He praises Ricardo for openly acknowledging that wages and profit move inversely. For that, well, you know what that means, right? As wages go down, profits go up. The contradiction between labor and capital is intensified. Landed property sheds its feudal illusion and becomes capital. I don't really think it does, but this is just me. Everything becomes capital. Everything is capital. Everything is an exchange. Everything becomes instrumental, which is true. Everything does become instrumental. This is Marx sharpening the conflict that we're talking about. The third manuscript, Private Property and Communism. We finally get to communism. Took us a while to get here, but hopefully we all understand why. Now Marx turns positive, big, happy, smiley face, thumbs up. He distinguishes three forms of communism that a lot of communists don't actually talk about. The first one, crude communism, not like crude oil, but crude like poorly thought out and designed. This is leveling down, universalizing poverty, abolishing property, but not transcending it. He criticizes it harshly. But that's what everyone on the left wants. They're at stage one right now. We're moving into stage two, though. Political communism, democratic or despotic, abolishes the state, but still infects, and still infected, but is still infected by property logic. Sorry, it's just been kind of a long morning. And then we get to true communism, the positive transcendence of private property. And this is how he describes true communism. You can never have it because the human condition is combative. And this is his description. Listen to how naive it is. The complete return of man to himself as a social being, the genuine resolution of the conflict between man and nature and between man and man. Communism is the riddle of history solved. Notice the tone. This is not economic modeling. This is philosophical redemption. This is a redemption arc for what he sees as wrong with the world. It is humanism. Naturalism equals humanism. Man reconciled with himself. That is powerful. It is inspiring. Oh, great. No. But it's also utopian, and you can't make a utopian society with imperfect machines, which we all are. Money and the corruption of needs. Now let's get into something that we can all understand a little bit more. It's a little more modern. Marx argues private property creates artificial needs. Division of labor fragments human senses. Money becomes the universal pimp. No, it doesn't, and I'll explain why. It inverts qualities. It allows the ugly to purchase beauty, the coward to buy power. Well, if you're ugly, you do need to buy beauty. And if you're a coward, you do need to buy power because you don't have any other way to do it. Money mediates everything. Again, brilliant philosophical observation. He's good at being philosophical, but actually putting in practice, not so much. But here's the libertarian counterpunch. He landed some body blows, but I'm going to hit this one knockout on him, and it's going to be done. Money is a neutral medium of exchange. It expands choice. It does not create vice. It enables voluntary exchange across strangers. The moral weight lies in human intentions, not currency. Now we're going to get into his critique of Hegel, who he had a falling out with before he wrote this. Now, Marx confronts Hegel, and this is really a good way to kind of explain it. He praises Hegel for seeing self creation as a process, for recognizing objectification and estrangement. But he argues Hegel reduces labor to abstract mental activities, which you could kind of argue. I may do another video on Hegel next week. Alienation becomes a problem of thought rather than material life. Hegel's dialectic becomes the self-movement of abstract spirit, where Karl Marx talks about the material dialectic. Marx insists on real, sensuous, material human beings. I think we can all agree with that. In other words, he grounds philosophy in economics. And from this point forward, Marx stopped being merely a critic of religion and becomes a critic of the mode of production itself. But yet he lives in that very mode of production and benefits from it. So, the conclusion, and why this matters to anyone, but most people want to just gloss over this part. The 1844 manuscripts are not finished. They are a laboratory where ideas are created and destroyed to prove whether theories are true or not. This is where Marx forges the following theories: alienation, species being, communism as human reconciliation. The only thing communism reconciles with is everyone's going to be poor unless you're in the elite, and the critique of political economy. Later, the Furbachian language fades, but alienation remains central in Capital. And I'm probably butchering that name, so just bear with me. Now, here is the final logical tension. Marx sees private property as the root of estrangement. And that's an interesting take because history would say otherwise. Libertarians, such as myself, see private property as the foundations of autonomy, which communists don't want and leftists don't want autonomy. They want autonomy under their rules, not under my own rules. Marx sees wage labor as commodification of humanity. Well, everything is commodified in this world. Stop it. Libertarians, such as myself, see voluntary exchange as mutual benefits. I drive Uber. I take a wage for driving Uber. If I don't want to do it, I don't do it. It's mutual. No one's entitled to it. Marx believes abolishing private property restores human essence. No, it doesn't. Libertarians, such as myself, argue abolishing private property abolishes freedom. If I have land, I want to be able to grow what I want on that land and be able to sell it for a surplus. So this is the real question. Is not whether Marx was insightful. He absolutely was. I'm not going to take that from him. The question is whether alienation is solved by eliminating markets or by expanding voluntary choice within them. And voluntary is usually important. Marx gave us the diagnosis of alienation, but did he prescribe the cure or did he misidentify the disease? He misidentified the disease. There's not a disease. But let me know what you think in the comments. And that, my friends, is where the real intellectual fight begins. Let's have it in the comments. Let's hammer it out and let's see if we can come to some type of consensus. This has been Are You Smarter Than a Libertarian? I'm your host, Jeff. If you like this content, please like, comment, subscribe, share. Help me get to 250 subscribers. That's my next goal. I'd greatly appreciate it. So, I just want to remind you of this. Think critically, question everything, and ask yourself, are you smarter than a libertarian? So, until next time, stay free, stay informed, and stay accountable. I'll see y'all next week.